Hi everybody, my name is Cindy Crum and I am the CEO of Mobile Moxie. We do SEO and ASO consulting and have for about 11 years now. I'm leading this webinar called Trusting the Compass, what comparing real SERPs to Google Search Console data can tell you about the direction Google's going in SEO. This is what I'm going to be talking about today in the webinar. This presentation was originally given at SEOktoberfest and then again at Ungagged LA. Both of those conferences are embargoed conferences where you're not supposed to talk about or share what you learn. But I am making this available. I think it's been a fair enough amount of time, and I want to make this kind of information available to everyone else in the SEO community. So that's what I'm doing today. The good news about a webinar is I'm not time constrained as I am on stage, so I might go a little bit off script and give you guys a little bit of background information that wasn't included in the original presentation. So we'll call this Cindy Unplugged, I guess. So in terms of the title of this presentation, I called it Trusting the Compass because I think about SEO in terms of, in this case, navigation, navigating the search results, navigating the algorithms. And what strikes me recently is that in the early days of SEO, a lot of SEOs really did a lot of testing and there was a lot of creativity in what we were doing to optimize websites. And I see now that Google is doing a lot better job of communicating directly to the SEO community about SEO, and I think that that's a mixed blessing because my fear is that if everyone is giving turn-by-turn directions, they forget how to actually navigate, and I have concerns that Google might not be telling us everything that we need to know, and so that's what this presentation is going to be about. And I'm using the themes of maps because I think maps and navigation go really well together, but I want you guys to kind of broaden your understanding of maps because maps don't just have to focus on land. We have things like star maps, we have page maps, and so these are going to be maps as an allegory. So when I talk about maps here today, I think we can also think of an analytics report as a bit like a map of how your website is doing, what's going on. And what you need to understand here is that in general, maps are always an abstraction of reality. They can't include every single detail because then they would be unusable. There'd be too much data. So they have to abstract and they have to summarize. And so if you look at a Google Analytics report, for instance, you do kind of get the sense, I mean, it does include a map for one, but number two, all of this information in analytics can be tied back to specific locations, but also helps us map and design the way we're going to move forward from an SEO perspective. So the important difference, or where I think things go wrong, is that in this abstraction of reality, at least when we're using Search Console to get data about rankings, it's truly an abstraction. And I like to think of it like the tube map, the London tube map. So if anyone knows anything about the London tube map, one of the most famous kind of factoids about it is that the directions of the lines are absolutely meaningless. They're only good for establishing the sequence of the stops, but they're not actually aligned with any kind of north or south, and when it turns in the map does not mean it actually turns in reality. They're just about sequence, and it's really just designed to fit all the names of the tube stations in a way that people can read the map. So this truly is an abstraction of reality that has a very specific use. And I would like people in the SEO community to start thinking about Search Console like that. Because while we are getting some ranking numbers out of Search Console, and this is the only place where Google really gives us ranking numbers, they're only sequentially accurate, but they might be missing some stuff, or they might be glossing over some important information, kind of like the tube map does. So the key concept here is that maps are often manipulated in the best interest of the map maker. So you might see where I'm going with this. I think that specifically the omissions in Search Console might be problematic. But let's look at this concept of maps being manipulated by the map maker. First, we can look at Esso Maps. Esso is the company Exxon. It used to be called Esso. And when people started buying individual cars and driving them around, SEO made a good push to publish a bunch of maps with all of the SEO stations on them so people could feel comfortable that wherever they drew, they would be able to get gas for their car. Now, what SEO wasn't putting in the maps was other gas stations. The maps only included major destinations in a place and the SEO stations that you could use to fill your tank to get to those destinations. So obviously there's a vested interest there in getting people to travel, but also getting fill up their gas tanks at SEO stations. Similarly, the Michelin restaurant guide was developed because people weren't driving enough to need new tires often enough. And so Michelin started thinking, well, what can we do to get people to drive around more? How can we incentivize people to drive more, to wear out their tires faster? So they've started publishing this almanac of really great restaurants and rating them so that people would have a reason to drive far away on a regular basis. And so the focus and the scale and the omissions in maps are really important, right? What is included is important, but what is omitted is also important. And so I tend to believe that all SEO tools oversimplify the concept of rankings. Now, potentially specifically Search Console, but all of them do. Because there are a lot of details that just can't be accounted for that cause variation in search results. We all know that the device type that you're searching on, mobile and desktop, can change the results. Now, Search Console does show the difference between mobile and desktop, but a lot of SEO tools make it hard or default still to desktop, even though Google said mobile first. The operating system that your browser is in can change the way a result is presented, the software that you have installed, the browser, if you've got an assistant, things like that can change the way a search result looks. Your specific location, more than just country, state, or city, but your street address in some cases can change the way a search result looks. Your device settings. This is one that no one talks about, but the default language set on your phone and privacy settings and whether or not you're logged in can definitely change the way a search result looks. And then last of all, connection speed. If you're on a slow connection, Google automatically tries to show you results that will look better on your phone and not show you results that won't work. And so that changes things too. Now, of course, we can't fault all of the analytics platforms for not showing this. This would make them almost unusable in some cases, but it might be nice if they became at least a little bit available, or if SEOs were more aware of how much these things might or might not impact search results. But here are some examples. So in this, I searched for how to draw a map, and I didn't change anything except for the language that I searched in and the location. And a lot of SEOs have been talking about intent, and we have to know the intent of a keyword, and we can tell intent by what kind of result Google shows. If Google shows a video, then there must be some kind of video intent. But I don't think that's quite accurate. In this example, if we search for how to draw a map in Arabic, we get 2 small videos and 1 big video. When we search in simplified Chinese, we just get a regular blue link with a bunch of expansion links. If we search in Icelandic from Iceland, we get pictures and then a blue link from Google about MapMaker, actually, is what that one's about. So I think that assuming that you can understand intent just by what Google surfaces isn't quite right. In these cases, it seems much more like Google is surfacing the best content that they have available in the language that you're searching from or searching with. So for instance, in Arabic, there are a lot of videos about how to make maps, but in Chinese and Icelandic, there aren't. So they have to surface different kinds of content. It's more about availability than actually assuming intent. But the other thing to think about is when you're looking at any analytics platform, be it SEMrush, Moz, Stat, BrightEdge, Searchmetrics, Advanced Web Rankings, any of those things, how often do you think about, or do you know, or do you have a choice to say, where are these rankings from? You may be able to say what country they're from, and in very slim cases, you may be able to say what state, and I don't think any of these do cities, perhaps Stat does. But for the most case, you're going country by country. And often it's passing either in the US, it's passing California, or it's passing some kind of centralized centroid for the country as the geolocation. But most people don't even stop to ask the question. This tool says I'm ranking in this position, but from where? Because location can change rankings. So the next concept is that SEO ranking positions from analytics, I think, are now more misleading than ever. In terms of maintaining position one, a lot of SEOs are still focused on what number they rank. And if they're in position one, they're very happy. But I think that just because you're maintaining position one doesn't mean you've maintained visibility. Because the search results are changing so much and Google is putting so much more at the top of the search result that it's pushing position one down and down and down. So just because you maintain your position doesn't mean you're going to be able to maintain your traffic or your click-through or anything like that, because they're putting more and more uncounted positions and content above you. It tends to be more interesting. So let's take a look. In this image-oriented query, I search for beautiful maps. And you can see in the mobile search result, we have at the top an image pack, a result with an image carousel, another result with an image carousel, a couple blue links with image inclusions in them. And then I'll move my picture. Yep, same thing over there. And then interesting finds. And then in the next one, the interesting finds has a quadrant of 4. And then we have another blue link with an image inclusion and a answer carousel. Then we have people also ask. Then we have another blue link with an answer carousel. And then more blue links with images, more answer carousels, and then a video pack towards the bottom. Now here's the problem. This is a really rich result. User would be very happy with this. But if you were actually targeting this query, beautiful maps, and you wanted to see how do the search results look, what position am I in, and how should I expect to do with that position? The problem is that these gray things are the ones that aren't counted or aren't reported in Search Console. So all of the people also ask, answer carousels, if there's an image pack, if there's an interesting finds, if there's video pack, there's no way to know from Console that these things are happening. And if they're happening directly above you, those things are more visual, more engaging, and they're going to drive more clicks than just a regular blue link or even a blue link with an image inclusion. The interesting finds, image carousels, those draw people in because they're interactive, you can scroll them, and they're more visual. And so you might think that you're doing a good job, but if all of these things are happening around you, they're probably taking more clicks than you think. And these are the numeric rankings. So we have position 1, position 2, and then drop down further, 3 and 4, drop down much further, 5, much further, 6. So they're not evenly spaced like they used to be. It used to be very predictable. If you were in position 1, you got this amount of click-through. In position 2, you got this amount of click-through. But that's just not the case anymore. So it's easy to feel lost with all of these things happening in the search result and Google giving us numbers, but not really being able to tie those numbers to an expected kind of click-through volume or anything like that, or even visibility. It's hard to know when are we doing a good job and when are we not. Because the map's not the terrain, right? Just because I've given you a map to show you roughly some abstraction of what's happening, it doesn't mean that you're going to know everything about the experience without actually having the experience or going to the search result to know what's there. And so that gets us to something else, which I think is interesting to posit in this mix, which is that when Google makes algorithm changes anymore, they are putting things in motion that they don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. And so in some ways, Google is driving blind because so much of the algorithm is driven by machine learning. And what the machine learning seems to be saying is that people really like these interactive visual experiences. And so even if Google hadn't intended to create a search result that looks like that, they have now, and it's driven by what the machine learning is telling them that people like. So here's the problem from an SEO perspective. There are so many things that that can show up in a search result but not be reported on in Search Console that we're getting overwhelmed. These are things like site links, image thumbnails, map thumbnails, image carousels, answer expanders, jump links and jump to links, fraggles, and then these bigger things, the hosted inclusions, the things that Google hosts themselves and tries to drive content to on their own servers. That's things like app packs, map packs, video packs, image packs, knowledge graph, featured snippet. People also search for related searches, interesting finds, anything from AMP, podcasts, PPC, and popular products. These things don't even necessarily have websites, or if they do, they have web content that Google hosts. And those tend to rank really well. Google likes showing the content that they host because they know that it's live, it's not 404, they can check it regularly, it's already been pre-vetted, things like that. So they love showing those things, and then they also show the stuff, the site links that are kind of modifiers of your blue link that you should be getting credit for potentially, but there's no way, at least directly from Google, to easily report on those things when you're doing a bad job or when someone above you is doing a better job. And that would be good to know. So the next concept is about mobile first indexing. And I talk a lot about mobile first indexing since my focus is mobile. And in all of our research, which we've done a lot, what we've found and what we believe is that mobile first indexing should actually be called entity first indexing, because that seems like what the change is really about. So when I say entity first indexing, what I mean is the concept of entities, and that this new type of indexing that Google is doing is based around the concept of entities. When we talk about entities, what I mean is a concept. So it's usually a concept or a noun, person, place, thing, or idea that you might look up in an encyclopedia. And what's important about entities is that they exist in all languages, but they're the same in all languages. We just have language as a modifier. So to make it more concrete, because I know that's very vague, when I say mother in English, we know that the relationships to mother and father, daughter, sister, brother, son, grandmother, grandfather, those relationships always stay the same, even if I'm talking about mother in a different language. Similarly, if I talk about a train is always a train. Regardless of what language I'm speaking, we might use different words to describe a train, but that doesn't change the trainy essence of the train. It's still a train, regardless of what language that we're talking about. Now, this is super hard for SEOs to wrap their brain around because they're so enmeshed with keywords that it's hard to understand that language is always describing something that's real, and language is a bit more ephemeral. But when we think about it from Google's perspective, Google does machine learning and is trying to organize and index the information of the world. And for a long time, Google was crawling and indexing the web one language at a time and understanding it one language at a time. And the problem there was Google was much better in English and languages with lots of people speaking and searching in them. And they were less good in smaller languages that had smaller populations. So it was easier to game the algorithm. There was more spam, there was less great content, stuff like that. When Google can back it up and index the world based on a pre-language kind of concept like entities, then they can machine learn everything and then just translate out to the needed language, the necessary language. And the relationships in entity first indexing, or in this new way that's pre-language, stay the same in every language. So it makes their job of machine learning the world much faster because they have all the languages coming through all at once without having to separate it and learn it one at a time. Now, and that makes sense if you know how Google's knowledge graph works, is everything is based on an entity ID, which is numeric. So if you think about math is the universal language, they don't even like key back to English, they key back to numerals, numbers, and number sequences. And this number sequence is related to that number sequence in the same way in every language. Now, what that gets Google, and what I think we're seeing play out in the search results, is a massive knowledge graph build out. So Google is saying, now I know all these things, and I want to surface more and more information and show what I know about this and the relationships that it has. And so we're seeing Google build out more and more knowledge graph and more knowledge graph carousels to say, here's the topic, here are the related topics, and they're putting more tabs in the knowledge graph. The other thing that's happening is Google is taking this knowledge graph and adding hosted inclusions, different kinds of things that they host and understand, that they understand are related through the topic layer, but might not fit in a knowledge graph entry, right? It's kind of like nice to know, but not crucial. And that seems like what's happening here. But all of this is a relationship to what Google calls the topic layer. And they've published about this. They've acknowledged that they're building out the topic layer. And so I think mobile first indexing, knowledge graph build out, entity first indexing, topic layer, they all seem to be related, and a lot of the hosted inclusions and the new things that Google is surfacing in a search result tend to stem off of the topic layer. The next concept is that hosted inclusions and the knowledge graph, I think, are related. Either the hosted inclusions are part of the knowledge graph or they're derived from the knowledge graph. And so let's look at how we might detect that from a search result. If we can agree that knowledge graph drives the topic layer and the presentations, then we can drill down. And so, then Google can drill down, really. And so when we search in this one for glass globe, we get not only this carousel of pictures of glass globes, but we get the ability to drill down and say, do you want it to be really acrylic, or can it be glass? Can it be large? Do you want it in a box? And so Google is saying, I don't know what you're searching for. There are ways to get more information about this topic that we've already mapped, right? I understand this topic. I've mapped it down deeper. Do you want to go deeper into what we've already mapped? The same thing is true with People Also Ask. When you look at People Also Ask, when we search, when we expand what is the best online map for directions, we get summaries that look a lot like a featured snippet. And I think it's potential that featured snippets are being tested to be included in the knowledge graph. But the larger point here is that when you search for something, the People Also Ask is Google showing you that it understands that your query is related to other queries. And it's trying to stem out to say, when people search for this, we think they are asking these questions. These are the questions related to that query. And what this is giving Google from a machine learning perspective is they're able to tie back to one query, which may or may not be formatted as a question. And based on what people are clicking on, they're able to numerically score how much is query related to this question and what is the most likely next question. That may not be so important for computer searches and phone searches, but it's absolutely critical for Google Assistant types of searches, because people aren't using the Google Assistant the same way that they would a desktop or a phone search. They're not saying, hey, assistant, and then yelling a keyword. Right? They're saying, hey, assistant, and they're formatting their query as a question. So if Google can make tight ties between a written query and a spoken question, then they can know what is the best result to surface, even if it's not typed in, even if it's long and got a bunch of extra words that aren't actually the traditional query that Google's used to. Then next, interesting finds. This is just another way to drill down where Google is saying, you've searched for something, I understand it as a topic, and I think these things are related to it. They might not be a core aspect of it because these are usually news-oriented things or local-oriented things. So they're not core to its being, but they're related. They're interesting tangents associated with that thing. And so the next idea is that Google localizes blue links, sometimes in a more granular increment than you might think. But most SEOs understand that map results are localized, and that if you walk a couple blocks with your phone and you're doing a search that's going to trigger a map query, the map query will change based on where you're standing at the moment. But most SEOs don't realize how much there's potential for the blue links to change as well. And I think as Google gets better and better at mobile first indexing, then they're going to be layering in more and more location data for certain kinds of queries. Not for everything, but for certain kinds of queries. So let's look at this one. We have a search for disease control. This one is in Los Angeles, 90210, of course, is the zip code. But when I search for disease control, standing in the 90210 zip code, the first result is the CDC, and then you get people also ask, and then after that you get the lacounty.gov website. Now, if we go just 10 miles away, 17 kilometers, when I do the exact same search, but from Burbank, which is 91526, we just get another result from the CDC. We don't get the LA County result. So, and this is a blue link. It has nothing to do with a map pack in this case. So if you are optimizing for this company and all you're doing is testing based on a city and not moving around that city, or testing based on a metro area and not moving around that metro area, then you're driving blind too. And so that's next concept is that Google localizes entity understanding based on language settings. This is another thing that most SEOs don't realize because most SEOs have their phone set to whatever language they speak and they never think about it again. But we've done a lot of testing on this to prove that the phone language settings or the Google language settings can change how search results look, and in some cases more than that. So this is a video of us using the Mobile Moxie Separator tool, and what we've done is we've searched for the Bermuda Triangle from Alabama. And we did it with a language setting of English, and you can see, kind of get a sense for what it looks like. It looks roughly the same between iOS and Android, mostly blue links, but a map result at the top. Now we'll go and we'll change that, and we're going to make it Arabic so it's easy for your eyes to spot the difference. Now what you're going to see is that Google is translating the knowledge graph, even though the query is still written in English. So remember, we changed the language setting without rewriting the query. You can see on the left, it still says Bermuda Triangle in English, but Google's translating the knowledge graph to fit the language setting. But the blue links are untranslated. They're still the same. So in this example, we search for Robinson map projection in English, again from Alabama, and we get this knowledge graph featured snippet looking thing. It's unclear which one it is. Scroll down and see kind of normal stuff that you might expect. There's people also ask right under the knowledge graph. Switch it to Japanese. Now this time when we run the test, we've still searched in English. The title is in Japanese, but the content is still in English in this case. But we've got a double featured snippet, and the second featured snippet is in Japanese. Or a double knowledge graph, again, hard to tell. Then we can see that we get the Japanese version of Wikipedia ranking in a blue link. But then again, since we've searched in English still, even though the language setting on the phone is Japanese, we're getting a lot of English results. But then again, the related searches at the bottom are in Japanese. And so this gives us a super good look into how Google's brain works in terms of language and when it's localizing things or when it's translating and when it's not. And to me, when I see Google translate something, that gives me a hint that it's probably part of the topic layer. Okay, next idea is that Google is better at localizing topic layer stuff and hosted inclusions than blue links. Now, we saw that a bit in the last slide, but let's look a little bit more. In this case, we're searching for, we're searching for antique maps from 3 different locations. So we're searching Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego. And what you can see here, these are the results. So we're all in California, but in the different major cities of California. And you can see that the results are somewhat different, but not overwhelmingly different when we map them out or list them out side by side. But again, what doesn't show up in Search Console is these things. So the paid stuff doesn't show up, and then a couple localizations don't show up. And let's go back. What was missing? What's covered up? Q&A, popular times, stuff like that. So when Google hosts it, they understand it, they can show it, they can localize it. When they don't, then it's a little bit harder for them. So next concept is just that the topic layer content is, I believe, Google's path to new monetization. So in this case, if we look at this query, we're searching for an atlas, a world atlas. And below people also search for, within people also search for, is this World Atlas Book 2018, which is 2019, so that's a bit weird. But what it is a product carousel, an organic product carousel that's included in people also search for. And when you click on one of those things, you get to a monetized product knowledge graph for this particular book. Now, the product knowledge graph, when it shows this to you, number one, they've got an ad above it. Number two, they tend to link to the book in Google Books. And you can see that other books or related items are directly from that carousel. And there's the link to Google Books right there. So in this, what we might see, or what you might take away from this, is that Google is taking information from all of the places where it has a hierarchy or relationships, and now using that to inform the relationships that show up in search results. Because in Google Books, they know that these are all atlases and these are all related, and they're all from 2018. They can put those in a set and surface that in a people also ask result, but then they can also potentially monetize it either directly in books or through the PPC ad that they show above it. Similarly, but more egregious, let's look at this example in maps. Now, when you search for, let's say, Italian food or sandwiches in Google Maps, now people haven't really been getting upset about it, but I noticed that they've added these huge buttons and these huge distractions from the original intent, right? Google says they care about intent, but do they really? Because when you search in Maps for this restaurant, the biggest button on the screen is the order for delivery. And then there's another button down lower to place an order with DoorDash. When you click through to the map and you expand the map, they include another button to get it delivered. And then if you click on that delivery, they again push you through DoorDash, where you're spending money potentially using a Google product to pay for it. But again, they give you the DoorDash info, and above that, look where it says delivery or pickup. Now, every restaurant that has delivery is showing you this kind of binary. Do you want this or that? Because you could go pick it up, but you could just get it delivered. And what you have to know about this is that Google has deals, and when Google includes these delivery options in Maps, Google's getting a cut of the cost of the food, a cost of the delivery. So Google's being cut into this deal. Now, if you decide not to drive and not to order delivery, and you go back to the map, you're like, no, I was going to go, I'm just going to Google, when you hit map and you're like, give me directions, Google's like, are you sure? Because you could take an Uber, right? So they've monetized that as well. They're taking the monetization in the maps really hardcore. Here's another example. When you search for movies, there's a lot of push towards using Google's index from Google Play to surface all the things that they understand about a movie, a TV show, what have you. So you can see in this one for Carmen Sandiego, we have all the episodes, all the seasons, and then within each season, you have all the episodes within that season. But if you click this more movies and shows, that's again based on what Google has in Google Play. So what they have available that they can monetize the way that they want. Same thing with the disambiguation above. I have not seen, it may exist, but I have not seen examples where there's a lot of media disambiguation for content that Google doesn't offer in its own platform. But if you do, if you found it, if you see it, let me know. Because I don't think Google's all evil, I just think that they're clever. Now, when we click through on one of the seasons, we go directly to a knowledge graph for that season. Again, we've got the link to more movies and shows. And then when we click on the disambiguation, again, it's to a knowledge graph for that particular information or for that particular show. And they've got it all mapped out. So I think that they've just done a really good job of ingesting all the information they had in Google Play to build out this part of the knowledge graph. And you'll see similar things happening with music, TV shows, movies, celebrities, things like that. They had all the information. Why not surface it in a search result? Why not at least either use the architecture from Google Play or replicate it into the knowledge graph? Now, something you may not know is going on is product featured snippets. So this is an example search for emergency compass, since we're on maps. And when you search for emergency compass, the result you get says the Burton Emergency Wallet Compass is a credit card side kit that contains the following disc compass. It goes on and on. It's rare to see a product in a featured snippet, but it does exist. Similarly, we saw the book knowledge graph for a book product, but there are other kinds of product knowledge graphs. In this case, I'm searching for choice crystal globe favor. So a crystal globe that's fancy and can be used as a favor at some event. And what we get is this thing that is obviously product knowledge, or that is obviously knowledge graph, but it's got the sponsored results below where you can buy this specific product online at all these different price points. You can also find out where you can buy it in stores offline, get reviews that are aggregated about this product, and it's got a share link. So Google is understanding the world and organizing the world and its information, and that includes down to the product level. And we've seen branded stuff here as well. It's not just unbranded stuff. There are vacuum cleaners, guitars, lots of different, very specific products that get knowledge graph. And in some cases, like an example that I do sometimes is with guitars. You can find a very specific guitar. Google knows exactly what colors you can order it in and gives you the option to order it on or offline, stuff like that. The other thing that we're seeing more and more too is expandable sponsored listing. So in related searches, when I did a related search to this query for a clear globe, we get, or a crystal globe gift is probably what I searched for. It says see best crystal globe gift, and we get horizontally scrollable carousel, but it's also expandable down. So Google is chalking this up with a bunch of sponsored results. Now, you may think that this is just happening for stuff that Google has in Google Play, but it's not. We're seeing more and more ways that Google is organizing things and organizing their brain even around products. So in this example, we see a search for emergency compass, and we have a product featured snippet. So it says emergency compass, it shows us a picture. And if you read it, it says the Burton Emergency Wallet Compass is a credit card size kit that contains the following compass. It goes on and on. So this is a product featured snippet. We also have product knowledge graph. This is a search for choice crystal globe favor, so a crystal globe favor. And you can see it's clearly knowledge graph. There are sponsored listings for where you can buy this particular item. Down below, you can buy it at Walmart. Nice price favors. There's also a tab for the stores you can buy it, and you can share this particular product knowledge graph. So this is kind of taking the place of potentially a product landing page. And then in this, lower down in that same result, you can see that we found more sponsored listings, and these are scrollable not just sideways, but they have an expansion too. So you can get a bunch of sponsored listings. Of course, those all go to Google Shopping, so Google gets a cut there. So I think that translation in general, when we saw the Japanese result, we saw the Arabic result with the Bermuda Triangle, and we saw how Google is really enriching the knowledge graph for products as well. So with that in mind, I think we can see that translation shows the relationship between entity understanding and monetization. Google is trying really hard to monetize the knowledge graph and everything in the knowledge graph and everything in the topic layer. So let's do this example. This is a search from Denver, Colorado, but we've changed the phone language to Bulgarian, but the query is written in English. We're trying to confuse Google a little bit, Toyota, Bulgaria. Now, what we get back is a result that shows the Google navigation is translated into Bulgarian. The ad notification is translated to Bulgarian. The only other thing that they were able to translate into Bulgarian was the call to action, which is called this phone number. They translated that. The ad wasn't written in Bulgarian, so they didn't translate that. They may do that in the future, but they're not doing that yet. But they did translate the call to action on behalf of the advertiser. But when we go into maps, it gets kind of more intense. When I search in maps with the phone setting to Bulgarian, restaurant near me. So I'm searching in English, but the phone language is set to Bulgarian. You can see the first thing that happens is a sponsored result. And there they are translating into Bulgarian for season 52. They didn't translate the name, but they did translate the information about where it is and how to get there. You can see even in the non-sponsored result down here, they're translating how far away it is and that kind of critical information that they host and that they understand. They've also translated up here the word restaurant and the meaning of the query, and they've translated the filters. So again, we're getting into Google's brain because we know what they understand of the query that we search for, a little bit more detailed than they do in a regular search when they're in maps. Now let's look at this, the Market Finder tool. When we use Google's Market Finder tool and put in a URL, get information about that URL, what it's trying to do is trying to find the market. It's trying to find out internationally where our market would work. So it's showing us the classification of the site. And then when we scroll down, it's showing us where we should be advertising based on the classification of our website. Now, there are a couple interesting things going on here, and I'm going to refresh this video and play it again for you guys so you can see. Now, this is a tool, it's free, it's available for anyone, and you can put your website in. Number one, they don't have enough time. I didn't cut anything out on that one. That's how fast they're pulling back the categories for the website. So number one, they're not crawling, we're already categorized. So it might be useful for you to go in and see how is your website categorized. In this one, we've got accounting and auditing, which is problematic because they're thinking we do financial audits when we do SEO audits. But then the other thing is they're translating that into places where we should be marketing through, of course, PPC for our kinds of services without telling us what keywords we should be targeting. They're telling us how much we should allocate from our budget to market in these different countries. So this is their internationalized understanding of the business opportunity for what it thinks we do. So it's based this marketing budgeting system potentially on their entity understanding and then how much volume of search there is and how much competition in paid there is. So that's a really sophisticated product, even though it's, looks quite simple. What's going on here does seem to speak to a lot of what Google's trying to do. They want people to monetize wherever they can, spend advertising dollars in the places where they're going to make the most money, and the advertiser's going to make the most money. So the next key concept is that the topic layer takes traffic from organic, but is omitted from Search Console. So I think you probably saw this coming, but a lot of the idea here is just that what we're seeing in the search result isn't reported to us, and the things that aren't reported to us are the things that are taking clicks and sometimes taking conversions. So this is another long mobile query. This one's purchase oriented, and when I searched for, you can see in the upper left-hand corner is where to buy a decorative map lamp. So it's pretty specific, but you can see here that first we get a GMB, and then we get Q&A and images, an image carousel, another image carousel. People also search for and related searches. So this is less focused on images like the previous one we did. This is more potentially a shopping query or a local query. And so here's how the numbers break down. We have only one result that gets on the first scroll, position 1, and then position 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are a bit closer together than the previous one, but they do have image carousels that could be driving lots of clicks. And even Etsy, this example from Etsy at the top in the middle, or both of those are actually Etsy. Etsy may not know that they're getting this image carousel because it's not reported to them in Search Console. And so here's the grayed out parts of what's not being reported in Search Console that either could be hurting you or could be helping you, depending on if it's your stuff or if it's stuff that's above you. So GMB, we don't know when we're in Search Console if the query that we're number 1 for has a GMB above it. We don't know if it has a map pack or if it has an ad pack. We just don't know. We think number 1 is number 1, but number 1 is not always number 1. Same test, let's do a news-oriented query. This time, Ukrainian news. in this case, we have a top stories carousel, we have an article carousel from The Guardian, we have a video pack down there, and then an article carousel. People also ask. We get a knowledge graph way down here in the middle with a topic carousel. And profiles for Facebook, then people also searched for, and then related searches at the very bottom. In this kind of a query, here's what the numbers look like. Again, only position 1 is on the first scroll, and position 2 through 5 on the second, and then nothing on the third, because that's all the knowledge graph, and then 3 through 8 on the last scroll. And obviously, there's only 8 blue links here. So in Search Console, this is what this looks like. A lot is grayed out because it's not being reported on Search Console. They may report on the ranking, but they're not reporting on the details of the ranking that might drive click-through, like an image carousel or a topic carousel or an article carousel. And those, if you've got an article carousel for your news company, you need to be getting credit for it, but you might not be if you're only using Search Console. If you're only taking information directly from Google's reporting, they're not telling you when you did a good job. Next, modularization of the index is a feature, not a bug. So as I said earlier, I think that a lot of this, this progress or this change in the search result is being driven by machine learning, but I don't think it's an accident. I think it's intentional. I think Google is trying to think about new ways to monetize all of their index and all of their results. And it has to do with deferred JavaScript rendering, and the mobile-friendly bot is much better, or not the mobile-friendly bot, the Evergreen bot is much better at parsing and indexing JavaScript. The thing about JavaScript is, if you think about a single-page app, it doesn't have URLs, or it doesn't. In a single-page app, it doesn't have URLs, so they have to be able to parse those too and find information in chunks within a very long stream of information. And so I believe that part of mobile-first indexing was being able to modularize or chunk large information into smaller pieces, even without URLs. And I've talked a lot this year about Fraggles, which is a combination of a fragment and a handle. And where we get that idea from is the app Android fragments, which Google has been able to index for a while now. If you can think about an app, a native app, as just kind of a long stream of code similar to JavaScript, they had to be able to find the unique pieces to be able to do deep linking and to index the apps. So I think that this is all in line with where Google is going in terms of trying to make minimal distinction between native apps and web apps. And in fact, I think in the long run, Google wants everything to be a web app. The other thing that I talk about, and this is advanced, if you haven't seen me talk at other conferences, you might need to get a little bit of background, but Google's been pushing really hard on progressive web apps, are a mix of native app and web app, but they live on the web. They feel like a native app, but they live on the web. And they use service workers to make a better experience. And I think service workers are there to store the HTML fragments and then stream them back to the web app in the browser. And this is a quote from me because I couldn't find anyone saying it exactly the way I wanted to say it. But last week was Chrome Dev Summit, where they talked a lot about service workers, and they made the official announcement about the content indexing API using service workers to find the offline content in a PWA. And index it. And so I used to tell a story about a Googler who kind of told me that Google was using an API to index service workers, even though he probably wasn't media trained and he probably shouldn't have told me that. But now I don't have to tell that story because they've made it official. Right? Google is using PWA service workers to index the information in a PWA, whether it's a single page app or whether it's a multi-page app, more like a website. Those service workers are basically have the APIs to allow Google not to have to crawl and not to have to push through the JavaScript so much, but just to get the most important information out of the service worker. Now, they're probably still crawling the JavaScript as best they can. They may use the API for validation, or they may use the crawl for validation. We don't know, but they're probably looking at both to make sure people aren't being spammy. But I think that service workers and indexing APIs are going to be the future of SEO. And remember that PWAs are really important, and they're not just for mobile anymore. Google is now allowing and supporting desktop PWAs. They work on, I think, iOS and Windows machines, and of course Chrome machines. So now being a PWA may give you an advantage not just on mobile but also on desktop. And I think we can see how this would move forward, especially if they make Google's job of crawling and indexing the web easier. Google's going to keep pushing for PWAs because they can just index content via an API, an indexing API, rather than having to blindly crawl the web looking for new information. So it's better on their overhead. The other things to think about, and this is really advanced, but for a while now, Google has been pushing isomorphic rendering, which has server-side rendering and client-side rendering happening at the same time. The idea is that it makes it faster for the users. And they also have been pushing hard for streaming server rendering and progressive rehydration. These are methods for making especially web apps feel seamless and fast. But the next thing that Google has started supporting in the guise of, or as part of this larger push for page speed, is what they call trisomorphic rendering. And trisomorphic rendering requires service worker. So I think what we'll see is that Google is going to start pushing harder for more and more websites to use a service worker. And they're going to say it's because of page speed. Which it is. It will help a lot with the perceived page speed of an app, but it's also going to probably give Google an easier time indexing the content because they can do it via the API without having to blindly crawl it. So this is a diagram about trisomorphic rendering. It might be something to look up, especially if you have a web app or a PWA. The other thing that's interesting here is the changes to robots text. So you can look and see at the very top, Google Bot doesn't have the red note that says does not respect robots TXT rules. Here's why. It's at the very top, but the next two do. The feed fetcher and the Google Read Aloud bots have these special notes that say that they don't respect robots TXT. So Googlers have been on Twitter and writing announcements about how robots TXT has changed, and you can't rely on robots TXT to actually block crawlers, that they're just going to take it as a suggestion. So my guess here is that smartphone bot, Google Bot, may still understand robots TXT the same way it always has. It's just that these two other bots don't. And so Google doesn't want to get us into the nitty gritty and say some of our bots do, some of our bots don't. They're just saying don't rely on it as a quick and easy way to explain it. But when you dig into Google's documentation, it's really the feed fetcher and the read aloud bot. And these two seem to be more oriented towards API indexing and Google Assistant speaking kinds of things. Of course, read aloud and then feed fetchers from APIs and XML, stuff like that. So I think that this might give us a little bit of backup information, because when Google's ingesting a feed, it may not have time to check a robots TXT, or there just may not be one if it's not a website, because you can get feeds from non-website content like apps, like databases, APIs, stuff like that. It may just not be a website, so there's not a place to put the TXT, the robots TXT, potentially. It's just an idea. So let's check this out. The next stage, and where sophisticated SEOs are going, is towards understanding what Google is getting in the first pass and what Google is getting in the second pass for JavaScript indexing. So this is the Mobile Moxie PageScope tool, and you can see that we've got a source code view without JavaScript, and a diff checker. This is going to tell us what is Google getting in the first pass without JavaScript, and what is Google getting when it tries to parse the JavaScript. And also see we've got old Chrome 41 view, which this would be like the same as your fetch and render. And we pull out the schema from the page. as well as all the HTML tags and stuff like that. So if you're trying to get into really understanding what's going on with the various versions of Googlebot, a tool like this that's going to show you the JavaScript and show you what's in first pass, what's in second pass, might be useful. Now, Google has come out and said that the time between the first pass and second pass, they originally estimated it would be about 7 days, potentially up to a week. But now they're saying it happens almost immediately after, which is good news, but interesting when you listen to the videos of them talking about it, because they were surprised. They hedged their bets and they said 7 days. And now they're saying it's almost instantly right after or within a couple of minutes. But they didn't expect that. And I think that's interesting for a couple of reasons. I think that there's so much machine learning going on that, again, they really didn't know how fast their machine would learn. But beyond that, I think that what that tells us was that their machine learned really fast because a lot of us are using very similar JavaScript frameworks. And once the machine learning program learned the basics of the JavaScript framework, there actually weren't that many variations that they found. So I think Google is progressing and all of this stuff is in flux, but if you have a problem on your website, it's probably worth at least knowing what's being passed in the first pass, what's being passed in the JavaScript second pass of indexing, because that might be covering up a problem. Okay, next idea is that modular content is faster to crawl and index. So that makes it also easier for Google to lift and monetize. Now we can understand why the modular piece-by-piece content might be faster to index, especially if they don't have to crawl it, they can just ingest it with an API. But when they're ingesting things with an API, they may already be cut into nice little chunks that are easy to represent. And so modularization might be Google's future, lifting content from different people's websites to show it in a search result, which might seem to make your website useless if all you care about is traffic to the website. But if you're just a marketer who cares about branding, then it's not quite so bad, because Google's doing actually a lot of the heavy lifting in creating potentially a good experience in their search result and getting you more front and center than you would have been otherwise if all you had was a website and all they could pull was a title tag and a description tag. So you're getting your brand out there, you're making it easier to find, and even though you don't have the measurable traffic impact, you can still do a good job as a marketer creating brand awareness, product awareness, brand loyalty, brand affinity, things like this. So just remember, from Google's perspective, anymore, now that the web is so big, hosting is much easier than crawling. And so that's the direction that Google has gone. You can think about everything that they host in Google Play, TVs, movies, apps, books, podcasts, all those things. But you can also look at what Google is trying to do with their hybrid cloud, Anthos. Anthos is allowing big businesses to create copies of their databases that automatically match up between their server and the Google Cloud server so that it can work with apps. That potentially, Google hasn't said it, and of course it would be a big violation if they did, but they could be using the structure of business or the architecture of business databases to learn, and maybe not replicating it, but at least knowing it and knowing this is how most businesses break up their database. And so perhaps that's useful for us if we see that all the businesses in this industry have a database that's formatted roughly like this. Maybe we should format our database that's on that topic roughly like that. Interesting conspiracy theory. I have no proof of that at all, but it's an interesting thing to think about. AMP, of course, Google hosts, Firebase, Google hosts or hosts mostly. And then, of course, APIs. We've talked a lot about APIs, but just remember, even if it's not called an API, sometimes it's an API. Schema in JSON LD is an API. Web portals, service workers all seem to either be APIs or associated with APIs. And they're making all of the content kind of smaller, more pre-formatted, but also more chunkable and easier to cross-present. A lot of attention in Google's non-SEO conferences has gone to web portals and trusted web activities. Again, this is a super advanced topic. If you haven't heard of it, it might be worth looking up. Google hasn't explained it this way, but I have a theory that portals might be kind of the opposite of a trusted web activity. Web portals are basically a way of pulling web content into a app or even pulling app content into a website, and trusted web activities are just a wrapper that you can put around a PWA to get it into the app stores, to make it feel like, to make it submittable to compete in the native stores. Either way, they talk about security and basically what sounds like to me the same way. Again, this is a theory and I can't prove it, but I'm interested to find out how similar trusted web activities turn out to be with web portals. We got a little bit more clarity from web portals last week at the Chrome Developer Summit, where it seems like originally I thought web portals were a way to pull native app information into a website, but now it seems like more they're a way to pull web app information into more of an HTML kind of wrapper and preload it and make it seamless. So yeah, that's it. Trusted web activities, just so you know, use custom tags. So old native apps used to use WebView to show web content in a native app. The new way of doing it is with custom tabs, which look like the example on the right. Google is using custom tabs a lot when they have the kind of windowed version of a native app. And so I think that we're going to hear more and more either about trusted web activities, TWAs, or custom tabs as they relate to building out a PWA and making it more engaging, and of course being able to put it into the App Store. The next thing to just keep your eye on is WASM. WASM is an abbreviation for WebAssembly, and what it is it's a language that makes things that previously were just native app code for the most part, like C++, C, and Rust. It makes them into web app friendly stuff, like it basically makes them into a web app kind of by converting them to JavaScript. Now, it's not meant to be a replacement for JavaScript, but it does seem like WASM is the bridge between native app and web app. And if they can go from native app to web app, and with TWAs, they can go from web app to native app, we are really seeing this heavy blurring of the lines, and that's exactly what Google really wants. So this is something else to keep an eye out for. Other things that are on my radar that I'm actively investigating and looking into, as I mentioned, Fraggles. We're seeing more and more different kinds of Fraggles. So video Fraggles, I anticipate soon seeing podcast Fraggles and music Fraggles, audiobook Fraggles, translation Fraggles potentially. I also anticipate seeing Google promote more and more kinds of speakable schema. Obviously, Google has doubled down on image alt tags and image descriptions. They talked about in Chrome Web Dev Summit how they're auto tagging images or auto describing images using their machine learning software. And they're doing this for the benefit of people using screen readers. And so that's one of the reasons Google has been pushing people really hard to do their own alt tags so that they don't have to push images through their image recognition software and write, potentially bad descriptions. Audio style screen readers, so something that will read a page to you, and any kind of other accessibility play. Those were a big deal at Chrome Dev Summit. Other things that, of course, are always on my radar, progressive web apps, desktop progressive web apps, service workers for progressive web apps, and the related APIs. How service workers are impacting page speed. Gutenberg for WordPress, which is also a modularization play that gives little bits of content IDs, module IDs. And that way, if Google can just ingest this module and it doesn't have to recrawl everything all the time like it would on a traditional web page, it can just find the ID and say, no, I've already got that, I've already got that, I've already got that. And so that saves them on crawling, but also makes it easier to chunk and lift and know what's unique content and what's not. I think that that's probably the path that a lot of things will go. And Google does seem to have been working very closely with WordPress recently. At Chrome Dev Summit, they announced a stack pack for Lighthouse, which allows you to get specific feedback on your WordPress site that's meant just for WordPress sites. It's something that you add into the browser plugin. But then also Google announced for WordPress that they are going to be allowing Search Console and Google Analytics information to go directly into WordPress, so you don't have to switch venues to get your analytics. That's all interesting. That tight connection between Google and WordPress seems relevant, and the fact that they've launched Gutenberg also seems relevant. It doesn't seem like an accident. Also, keep track of WebAssembly or WASM. Watch out for the relationship between TWAs and PWAs, both on the web and in the stores. And then watch out for portals. These are all new topics that are coming up that if you're in advanced SEO, you should be watching out for. So with that, I know I've given you a lot of kind of random ideas and topics that may seem disjointed to you, but the main takeaway here is that Google's making a lot of changes to the way a search result looks, and that it may not be clear in your analytics, whether it's Search Console or something more sophisticated like SEMrush or Moz or any of those, Rank Ranger, whichever tool you're using, it might not be telling you the full story. And so we believe that for your most important queries and your most important audiences, you really need to go back to doing test searches. So we created a tool that can help you with that, because the tools that you're using are stationary, and that's a problem because your customers aren't. They're moving around. They are constantly searching from phones. You know, more than 60% of searches are now from phones, but those phones are sending different signals depending on where they are and depending on who they are. And if you're not testing for that, you may be missing something. And you could test for that by driving yourself around your town if you're just working in one place. But that's super slow and potentially a driving hazard if you're typing on your phone while you're driving. And you can fly if you have international, clients. You might have to fly to see what a search result looks like from a particular location around the world. Or you can kind of lamely ask friends on Twitter and wait for them to get back to you with a search with their screenshot, but you don't know exactly what their settings are on their phone, and that can be super slow, and you have to publicly out yourself that you don't know how to do stuff like that. And when there are ways, right? You don't have to just ask random people to do searches for you. So here's the pitch. I want you to use our tools. This is what we built the tools for. The Serperator specifically is meant to take in all the information that might change the way a query looks in a search result and map it to a specific location. So this includes phone language, address, location down to the address, so not just a city, but down to a street address, and phone type and search language. And so you can compare the difference between different size phones, different operating systems, different locations, all this stuff. And we put it on a handy dandy map for you so you can see when is a potential DMB listing coming in and pushing your result down, when is it not, what does paid look like in all the places. But I think we need to relearn our investigative techniques and not just always trust what Google is saying. Because like this one, you saw we got a lift app pack, and the previous one we had a map pack, right? We're getting different results for the same query, depending on where we are in the country. But remember, this tool works all around the world. It's not just a US tool. You can test addresses from anywhere, and it also has a Google Sheets export. So you can just take all of the results, take all the addresses and the query and push it out into Google Sheets, and it just creates a sheet automatically for you that looks like this. So you've got all of the different phones, the location, and if you had a specific address, you would have that too in here. This test didn't have it. But you can also change the settings and just run a live test for whatever you want. So that's a pretty cool little utility. You click the little icon and it just gives you exactly what's going on in that place. Very cool. So remember that current SEO tools might be misleading you, and they're just not good enough, especially for your most important queries. We have lots of great feedback. Andy says, Serperator crawls from wherever I need it to, right down to a postcode level, and it's actually a street address level. And he says it's genuinely incredibly useful. Recently ran a local pack report in Stat by Moz, checked the results using the SERPerator, and it appears that Stat was just crawling from one central location, not what we needed for our reporting and local SEO efforts. And that's true for many people, especially local SEOs, but also for the blue links. Things are changing, and you don't realize it because you're trusting your analytics without actually testing. So test. This is what the live testing tool looks like. All of the things I said, you can do one phone at a time or two. I usually recommend doing one Android phone and one iOS, one large and one small, because the operating system and the size of the phone can also impact your search results. The other tool that I mentioned is called the Pagescope. It's great for checking JavaScript and just checking rendering. And it also is location specific. So if you have rights restrictions, or geo restrictions or geo redirects that you need to test, it's a great tool for that because you can put in the location and see how does the page look from a particular location. And that's me. So thanks for your attention. I know this was long and there's a lot of information. I hope it makes sense to you. If you want to use the promo code webinar 005, that's all caps, all one word. We'll get you 30 days free access to the Mobile Moxie tool set so that you can try those tools out, including the export to sheets, including bulk uploading, and a lot of other stuff that I didn't have time to mention. I appreciate your attention. I know this is a long webinar. Enjoy the tools and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.